Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to use the Propagation Garden collection and create a window card. I absolutely love the variety in this collection, and I thought that flat frame, I'm not exactly sure what the name of it is, would be good for creating a window card on the front of the card. So I have some dark brown cardstock here that I'm going to use for my frame. Now I don't want it to stay that dark, so I will ink it to make it a little bit lighter, but I wanted to have a frame that had a nice contrast on the background of my card. I die cut the rest of the pieces off screen using the Propagation Garden frames, the propagated plants die set, as well as the laboratory glass die set. So for my little beakers here, I cut out some pieces out of blue to make it look like water, and I'm just using a little bit of distress ink in tumbled glass to give it a little bit of dimension and variety. I'm not being too careful with my inking here because for those beakers, I'm going to put some glossy accents on there, and because the distress ink is dye based, the ink is going to blend and bleed a little bit while that glossy accents is wet. For my leaves, I'm using mostly peeled paint to give them a little bit of dimension, but for this particular one, I added a little bit of Kitsch Flamingo in the center of the leaves. I always love leaves that have a little bit of pink to them, so I've been doing that as much as possible just because I love those type of plants. No idea what their names are because while I enjoy plants, I can't grow one to save my life. I also used some vintage photo to add a little bit of shading to the roots. And again, for those roots, I wasn't really careful about it simply because that's going to go under the glossy accents. It's going to blend and bleed just a slight little amount. I always like to do the ink blending before I assemble anything. It just gives it a little bit of extra dimension, and it gives me the freedom to move things around while I'm doing that ink blending. It just gives it a little bit of extra dimension as opposed to just plain colored die cuts that aren't ink blended. So for my frames, I'm going to use some Hero Arts pigment ink in Unicorn White, and I'm using a tiny blending tool to do it. You could use whatever you like for blending. I just got these and I thought this would be perfect for white. You can get a little bit of ink over the thing. I'm not trying to be heavy. I'm just trying to lighten the brown a little bit. These wood pieces or the frame pieces have some texture that gets pressed into them while they're being die cut. So by inking them, you kind of highlight that texture a little bit. It's a little bit indented, so it's not going to get any of the ink on it. So you just see that a slight bit more, as well as the fact that it just makes the die cut pieces look a little bit more interesting than flat brown. The other way you could do this if you wanted to be more heavy-handed with it is you could take a brayer and put a brayer through your ink pad and then run it along your die cut pieces. But I just wanted it to have a little bit of a slight whitewash feeling. I didn't want to completely cover that brown totally. I'm using some Barely Art glue and a fine tip bottle to glue everything together. And once I have the 4 pieces to my frame together, I'm going to put an acrylic block on there just to hold everything down and flat and make sure that everything has good contact with the piece below it, and it's also going to free up my hands to work on my next part. I love using the glue in the fine tip bottle simply because you can control exactly how much glue you put down. You can put a little tiny bit for a small area or a larger bit if you're gluing down a larger area, and you don't have to pick and choose between different glue bottles. So for the little beakers, I have the base of it cut with just white cardstock. I used some light gray for the outline of it. I wanted to have it to have a little bit of an outline, but I didn't want it to be totally contrasting to the beaker. So I just did a light gray with that. And then I have those little water pieces that I ink blended with that tumbled glass. I'm going to glue that in the bottom and let those sit for a few minutes to dry while I'm gluing or assembling the other pieces. I'm going to put the root right on the water piece. And then you may have noticed when I was adding the glue to the frame of the beaker, I didn't actually put glue on the top part. I want to put some glue on my bottom part of my plant and tuck that underneath because I want to see the top part of that beaker. I don't want that plant going in front of it. I'm going to let that dry for a few moments, and once that glue has taken hold, and it really doesn't take very long, I'm going to put some glue on that top part of the beaker and then glue that down so it's all nice and secure. Now, I've done a few videos with this collection already, and I love it simply because of its versatility. So I'll link to one of those videos at the end. If you want to see more done with this collection, go look on my recent videos in the last few weeks or so, and you'll find some more videos using them. Again, I just love the versatility of it. I love all the bits and pieces. They're great for die cutting cardstock scraps because most of the bits and pieces for the plants and the beakers really doesn't take much of each color. So it's a great way to use those up and just get creative with them. There's a lot of plant varieties, which I appreciate. I love being able to pick and choose what's going to work best for the design that I'm creating. And it just gives you a lot of creative control when creating. You can also pick and choose which are going to go better or fit throughout your card front. So it's a great collection. Like I said, very versatile, and there's so many different things that you could do with this. The hardest part about the whole thing is die cutting, but if you spend some time ahead of time just die cutting a ton of little bits and pieces so that you have lots of choice, you can just have fun creating after that. I assembled the leaves on top of my plant bases before recording, but they're really easy to figure out exactly what leaf goes where. I did my assembly with my plants in one of my last videos with this, so I didn't figure I needed to do it with this one. So if you want to see that, that'll be in one of those videos as well. Again, they're very easy to figure out what goes where and to assemble. And like I said, great for using up some cardstock scraps and just having fun. There's a lot of different samples out there using this. So now that I have that whole thing assembled, I'm just taking my glossy accents and I'm going to put it on the bottom part of that beaker from the blue part down. I'm not putting it on the entire beaker. You absolutely could. In my last video, I used some clear Duralar so that those beakers were completely clear and transparent, and I love the look of that as well. I just wanted to do something a little bit different from that for this video, just to add a little bit of variety. Once I have my glossy accents done here, I'm going to leave it overnight to dry. Depending on the thickness of your glossy accents, it's really going to depend on how long it is going to take to dry. I'm doing this part of the video later on in the afternoon, so I can easily wait overnight and I know it's going to be completely dry in the morning. If you are working on it and want to be continuing working on it throughout the day, what you can do is take a similar area on a piece of cardstock or whatever, put some glossy accents on there, and then you can take that scrap and test that part just to make sure that your glossy accents is completely dry before you carry on. You don't want to carry on when it's not totally dry because it'll dry on the surface, but it won't be dry in the center and you'll probably ruin something. So you can see overnight it dried and it got a little bit of a curve to it while it was drying. It's still very malleable, so it's really easy just to curve that with your fingers and flatten it back. I have a top folding note card here. It's A2, 4.25 by 5.5. And I'm taking a die from the A2 Matting Basics B set, and I'm going to cut an opening in that card front. I just chose the die based on the size of my frame. I want my die cut opening to be a little bit bigger than that frame so that I don't see any white on the inside. If you wanted to see white on the inside, you could easily pick a size that was a little bit smaller, but I wanted my opening to be as big as possible and be able to see through that. So once that is done there, I can start assembling my frame with my beakers. I have everything put together here and dried, and it's really easy to put it together once you've got all of these little bits and pieces assembled and dried. With the Propagation Frames die set, there are some pieces here that I die cut with a dark silver cardstock for the bar across that the little beakers are supposed to hang on. I actually cut that twice because I wanted it to be a little bit more sturdy for this particular card because that window is going to have an opening in it. If I was just doing a regular card front where I was gluing this to cardstock, I wouldn't necessarily need to do that. It would be totally fine just glued down to the cardstock, but because the beakers are going to be glued to this, I wanted it to be slightly more sturdy. So I glued one to the front of my frames after making sure it was the right level for these little beakers, and then glued one right to the back of it. You don't even see the back one until you open your card and you can see that back piece there. With that glued down, I can start to glue my beakers on here. And this first one here, I put the glue on the back of the beaker and then realized it was going to be much easier to just put the glue on that little dark silver piece and then glue my beakers to it. So I want to make sure that they are just a little bit higher than the bottom of the frame so that they're hanging. And I find the best way to get spacing with this is put the two on the outside and then center the one in the middle, or put the one in the middle and then put the two on the outside. I would do it either one of those ways. I wouldn't do going from, say, left to right or right to left, because then it's a little bit too easy not to get the spacing correctly. So the backing for these beakers, I have another piece of white, and these are just cut out of cardstock scraps as well. I'm going to glue that to the back. It's just going to make that a little bit more sturdy, make that connection with that little bar piece a little bit better. And it's also going to just look a little bit nicer from the back side. So I'm going to glue those down with that same Bearly Art glue, put my acrylic block on there and let that dry. Now, because there is that piece of cardstock for the bar, I let it dry with the block on the whole piece for a little bit, and then I moved it so that it was just on the top part, so that top part of those little beakers glued down. There's also some little accent pieces for the side of the frames as well as the front of the beakers. These, I find the easiest way to put them down or glue them down is getting a pair of reverse tweezers to hold your piece, put the glue on the back of them, and then release the tweezers to put them onto your card. If you're holding these with your fingers, it's really hard to get glue where you need it to go without getting the glue on your fingers, because they kind of get in the way. So these tweezers come in very handy for this. And you can see how, because we took the time to assemble the beakers with the plants ahead of time, it comes together really, really quick and easily. And you don't have to worry about those pieces attaching or staying attached to themselves while you're gluing it to the frame. So I highly recommend having those or assembling those ahead of time so that they're ready to go before you go to assemble the rest of your card. The rest of it comes together super quickly and easily once you have all of those beakers with the plants completely assembled and dried. So now we have our frame with the plants hanging on that little steel rod looking thing. I'm going to put some glue to the back of this. I'm avoiding the center part of that frame just because I know there's a little bit of an area where it is not attached to the card front. I'm going to glue that down and put an acrylic block on there to hold it down. I created a second top folding card for the inside of my card, and this one is actually 4 inches by 5 1/4. I wanted it to be just slightly smaller from the card front, and I'm going to glue one of the sentiments from the Garden Sentiment set. This is a sentiment set that has a lot of plant related sentiments, and it also has some coordinating dies, but I don't actually need any of the dies for this. I'm going to stamp it right into the card. I'm using some peeled paint ink. It's going to coordinate beautifully with the plants. And by having a second card on the inside, I can put some coordinating cardstock on the front of it, so then the part behind those plants and little beakers is going to be a different color, and it's going to just make them pop out a little bit more, and it's going to show off a little bit better, in my opinion, than just having the white from the card. And it's also going to give you a separate space to do your writing. If you were to leave the card the way it was before that insert was put in there, if you were to write on the inside of the card, you'd be seeing that on the front of the card. So I like doing it this way so that that is hidden, and then you also get that pop of color from the blue behind there. Now you can see when I first had it glued together and put my card up, it didn't really sit correctly. So I'm just taking my Teflon bone folder here and I'm just reinforcing that fold with that card in the middle there. And you can see how it stands up much nicer after you do that. So I absolutely love the way this card turned out. I love that opening in it. It just gives it something a little bit different. You could easily stamp a pattern on that blue part, or you could use the coordinating leafy helix embossing folder from this set to give it some extra texture. I've done that in some of the previous cards, so I didn't do that for this one, but I love the contrasting color there. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking your time and spending it with me. Have a fantastic day.